Do you think comic books are organized in the right way on the shelves? When you go into a comic shop, typically people have all the Marvels together and then all the DCs together and then a big pile of indies. Or they have them all alphabetical, or they have the stuff that's out this week in one place and everything else. But is that kind of old thinking? Is there a better way? Hey there, this is Perch, and this is a thought I've been kind of going over in my head a lot lately, and that is this is all based on the premise of how do we get more people reading and buying comics? And in particular, the way I'm thinking about it right now is, you know, how do we get new people to read and buy comics? So one thing that I think any comic shop will tell you if you strike up a conversation with them is that there's such a thing as, people who come into the shop and they are they know what they're doing. They're old customers, they know the score and all the rest, but there's a good population, and in many cases some will peg it at, especially depending on the location of the shop. Okay, so let me say there's kind of two kinds of comic shop locations. There's either a shop that's in a reasonably trafficked area, like any kind of mini mall. Anytime your shop is around other stores, particularly true if your shop is around a game store or something like that. And then there's the other type of comic shop that tends to be standalone, meaning it's kind of in its own little area. It's got its own parking lot, or it's not it's not with other things. It's not in a mall. It's not in a strip mall. It's not an outdoor mall. It's kind of it's on its own, and the clientele you get for each is very different. The clientele for an on its own shop is that typically is, I would say 80% to 90% either regulars or comic fans who know what they're doing. They're coming in, they've already drank the Kool-Aid, they're already addicted, and they are kind of all in on comics. And then the shop that is in a mini mall or in a any kind of place where it's got a lot of shops around it, that tends to have a very high number of people who come wandering into the shop, not really knowing what they're doing there. In fact, if you're in a mall, like an actual legit mall, and it's funny because people say, "Oh, the mall is dying." Maybe, but you go into a mall on a Saturday, you will find plenty of people there. But if you go into a location like that, I've heard numbers anywhere from 60 to 70% of the people who are coming into the comic shop are coming in completely unaware of what they're doing. They're not comic fans, or sorry, they're not. They're curious. They're comics curious. They definitely know the Marvel movies. They kind of recognize Spider-Man, Batman. They know what comics are, of course, but they're not regular readers. They don't have a full box. They don't have a subscription. They're not really sure how much comics cost. Those customers, and I think that comic shops do a really poor job of marketing to those customers. And now think about it for a moment. I had this disagreement with somebody in a Facebook group, which will absolutely kind of drop the dime on who I am, because I was one man, me, your brave Perch, against about 20 other people, 20 other retailers. But my premise was simply this: it is, um, if if 70 to 80% of customers coming into the shop are kind of look-see customers. They're people who are they don't really know why they're there. They had kind of a spark of an interest in Batman or something that either they saw a movie or they, for whatever reason, they're curious. If 70 to 80% of the customers are those, then we need to do a better job of snaring them, of getting them into a regular comic buying purchase, or at least get them a purchase that will get them to come back and make another purchase. In comic retail business, you don't have an environment where somebody buys, a new customer comes in and you talk to them and they get excited and they open up a pull box and they immediately subscribe to 20 titles. That is the dream, but that's never what happens. Instead, it's somebody comes in, you want to hook them enough that they get an issue, particularly an issue maybe with with a cliffhanger or something and get them to the point where they will come back and buy another comic. Because once they come back 2, 3, 4, 6 times, it's usually on that sixth to eighth time. That's when you start looking at subscriptions or pull boxes or other things. That's where you start. The value of the pull box is, hey, let us make your life easier so you don't have to stress about your comics selling out. And it's just here for you. You've got it. You're not going to achieve that in the very first visit. You're going to achieve that down the road, usually 1 to 2 months later, at least, of them coming in. Unless, of course, they bought comics previously, but that's not what I'm talking about. So the argument went like this. My thought was, hey, we need to change the way we put comics on the shelf. We need to change the way we're baiting the comic shop for those kinds of customers. Let's assume for the moment that every customer coming into a shop who's curious would like a comic. I think that's fairly true. Think about a comic that that we liked. Think about a Craven's Last Hunt, or a this current X-Men series by Hickman, or the Snyder Capullo Court of Owls Batman run, or a good old Man of Steel by John Byrne, or a Fantastic Four by John Byrne, or a She-Hulk by John Byrne, or really anything by John Byrne. No, except X-Men, not X-Men. You think about kind of these types of titles. If you could just get them into the hands of somebody who's mildly curious about superheroes, the comic then would sell itself. So how do we get our comics into the hands of those people in a better, cleaner way? Because the comic store today is organized around repeat customers. It's organized around people who already know what's going on with comics. When you organize your comics by Marvel and DC, or alphabetical, or or even like new this week, think about those terms. Everything I just said means absolutely nothing to somebody new coming in the shop. They don't know what new this week was versus last week, and they weren't in last week, so it's all new to them. And Marvel and DC are concepts that really don't resonate with new customers. That comes later, once you've fallen in love with a particular character or universe. And the idea of having it alphabetical means absolutely nothing. Oh, so here's the A's come before the D's. Great. It's just like the library. Those concepts don't mean anything. So a lot of stores will kind of, in many ways, self-select themselves out of attracting new customers because they're organized and they're displaying comics in a way that doesn't make sense to a new reader, doesn't make sense to a new customer. So basically, they leave that new customer to kind of hopefully kind of serve themselves, and most places won't in our new environment of guest experience and customer experiences, and having a higher touch point on the customer. Um, all of that doesn't matter. You're basically telling the new customers that come in, hey, good luck. Find a comic that hopefully appeals to you. Let the cover basically do all the work. Or we've got this nice pile of Funkos over here. You can buy one of those. We're losing a lot of business. And when that business is when the foot traffic coming in the store is 70 to 80%, in other words, 3/4 of the customers are new. If you could convert even 1 out of 10 of those, that's success in a store. That's how a store stays alive. So, and the pushback I got back is kind of the pushback that always comes, which is no, this is the way it's always been, and this is the way it always will be. It's amazing how even in creative fields like this, people use some of the same logic that was applied to such amazing concepts as leeches for illnesses and slavery, and the value of horseback carriage versus a car. It's always been this way, and it will always be this way. Kind of behavior. So, what's the solution then? Well, I think the biggest is let's flip the model for a moment. Let's assume that the people who've been coming into the shop over and over and over, they know what they're doing. They know how to find the comics. They know where to go look. They know who they're interested in. And maybe they even have a pull box. So the whole concept of the shelf doesn't matter to them anyway. So let's flip the model and make it harder on them and instead make it easier on the new customers. And when I say harder, I don't believe it is harder because again, if you put it this way, if you took your store and there's a big, very successful, makes lots of money shop in Seattle called Golden Age Collectibles. It's right there in Pike Place Market, and it benefits from it being right in the heart of a big tourist attraction. So it's got cramped, unpleasant foot traffic 100% of the time. But they basically use an approach, and I think they've got it closer to right, where they just shotgun blast the comics onto the shelf. Yes, things are separated by Marvel and DC, but they kind of put the Avengers titles together. They kind of put the Spider-Man titles together, put the X-Men titles together. They put the Superman books and the Batman books. They don't. There's no order. I mean, if you're a kind of an organization freak, that this is a shop that makes you lose your mind. It's just the comics are just up on the shelves, and then they try and put the newer stuff toward the top, but not always. It is what it is, and nobody cares. And the fact that their clientele is coming in, and it is a tourist shop, so I would guess their rate of diehard comic fan to new fan is probably in that 70 to 80% range of new comic fan. They're able to hook them, but I mean they also sell a lot of merchandise and other crap. But I think they're onto something because, again, if you're coming in new, you don't know anything about comics. Why are you coming in? You're coming in because you just saw Spider Man or you heard it was Batman Day and you're curious what all that's about. So, from a store's perspective, your goal should be to navigate them to Batman as fast as you can. And in addition to having the new comics up on the shelves, you need to have a couple ringers up there. Because, put it this way, if you're a new comic fan, you haven't ever read comics before, but you've got an interest in Batman. You're watching the TV, and your kid goes, "Oh, Batman's awesome," and you're like, "Yeah, Batman is awesome." I remember when I watched that Michael Keaton Batman movie back in grade school. Yeah, let's go to the comic shop and see. Why not? There's one by the Piggly Wiggly, and we'll get some food, and we'll go step into that shop. So if you're that person, you go into that shop and you're interested in Batman, and you go and you pull the top issue off the stands, and hey, it's like hey, it's Batman and Catwoman's on the cover here, and she's fighting some villain I don't really recognize, and I open it up and there's Batman's got a mustache and he's walking around with his shirt open. What's going on here? Wait a minute, Alfred's dead. What? Why is Batman so sad? Who's this? Why is Catwoman in yoga pants? That's probably not going to hook a new reader. If you're coming in right now into Tom King's run of Batman, you're going to be very confused. That's not enough bait on the hook. And I don't say this to bash Tom King. I think if Tom King was sitting right here with me, I suspect he would agree. You can't just come into issue 74 of the Tom King Batman run and expect it to make any goddamn sense whatsoever. So when you're putting these comics on the shelves, you should bait them. Have the new Batman, have the Detective Comics there, have Batman, Superman kind of in that zone, but put up that's where maybe you put some trade paperbacks right up on the shelf along with the new comics. Make it so that the person comes in, it's like, hey, I'm interested in Batman. It's like, well, cool. Here's the newest issue over here, but it's right in the middle of a storyline. You probably don't want to start there, pal. Why don't you pick up this Court of Owls book right here? Why don't you, here's Dark Knight Returns. This would be something fun to kind of read. I mean, why not kind of steer them in that direction where if you don't have a brand new comic on the shelf that is going to match somebody new coming in, then steer them to this graphic novel. Amazing Spider-Man, by contrast, if a new customer comes in, they don't know anything about Spider-Man. What do you want to do? Well, make sure that their first connection point is not Peter Parker Spider-Man, because the current Tom Taylor run, because you're likely to get them. I mean, it's like he picks this one issue up. It's like, what's Spider-Man's helping a kid with cancer? I mean, it's a good issue, but that's not going to be the quintessential, Spider-Man. I think the Nick Spencer Amazing Spider-Man's got, pretty short story arcs and probably a much better place to go. You have a much higher chance of success with that comic appealing to somebody new. And so the kind of the thought process I'm just doing here is I think there's a lot we can do in the shop to hook new fans, to get people engaged and interested in comics. And arguably, that should be our priority, not just to build our business and grow our customer base, but because the majority of people coming in, that they are new fans. They are people who are new to comics. So it makes sense to organize that way. It makes sense to steer that way. I think that's all the kind of the interesting parts to how this business kind of works and operates. But anyway, what do you think? Does this make sense to you? Have I kind of won you over a little bit with my case? I think that for the comic industry to be healthy and to grow, we need to be willing to look at all different sides of things. We need to be able to look at, are we doing it wrong? Are there more optimal ways to do things? Is there a cleaner, healthier, smarter way to appeal to fans? Can we get new readers that we didn't get before? I think these are questions we should ask ourselves, and we should be brave and fearless about asking those questions because status quo is not working, clearly not working. So, maybe there's a better way. Anyway, what do you think? Leave me a comment below. Let me know your ideas. What do you think of this idea? Would you like me to go into it further? Leave me a comment below, like, subscribe, click the bell for notification, tell a friend, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.